All right, so for Django, this will be the first day where we actually go through and make a full stack Django application, back and front end. So here, if you can see my screen, this is in the README for today. So this is a basic diagram describing Django. So far we've only seen this part right here, the models. And today we're going to see all of the rest of it. So some of this should be analogous to what we've seen with the HTTP server. And if you didn't get all that, that is fine. But the main entry point from a client's perspective is going to be the URL. So they're going to hit a specific URL on a specific, at an IP address and port. They're going to hit a specific URL, and then just like in the HTTP server, what you actually get is essentially just a string, right? It's a formatted string that follows this HTTP protocol. So because it follows a protocol, so the server can programmatically parse through it and pick out relevant pieces of information. Like, for example, the URI. So if I go to example.com, in the very first HTTP, the very first line of the HTTP protocol, it's going to tell me if I'm going to /nothing or /users or /post/5/ whatever. So that'll be handled in the URLs. So that's where where does the user want to go in this application? And then the views is basically going to be the logic. It's the center node and all of this stuff. So this is where all of your real application logic is gonna come. So if I'm the view, I know, okay, so someone wanted to make a GET request at the /users endpoint. Okay, so I'm going to go talk to the database, and I'm going to grab all of the users that are in the database. So from the models, right? So I'm going to get all of the users, and then I'm going to take all of those users and maybe do whatever other logic I want to do, parse through them, maybe make some other API calls somewhere else. And then in the end, what I'm going to do is say, okay, I have all the basic information and processing. All the information that I need and all the processing that I need to do has been done. So I'm going to send the user some HTML, because that's what the client expects. Ultimately, the client is going to want HTML. So here's this other piece, which is the templates. So we used Jinja 2, and Django also uses Jinja 2, so it should look familiar. But the view will do whatever logic it does. It's going to get all the information, and then it's going to say, hey, template, I'm going to send this information to the template. The template is going to create an HTML document, and then the view can send that HTML response to the client. So that's a basic overview of how Django, and I think basically any other full stack framework will work. So this is often called the MVC framework. Is a design pattern, just like an architecture. So model, view, and controller. It's confusing because Django uses, so if this is your first time being exposed to this, it's confusing to start with Django in some ways because the terminology that Django uses is different. So the model is the same. This is Django's models, and that's what we've been doing so far. It's the ORM, it's the interactions with the database. The view in the MVC framework is what the user will ultimately see, and that in Django corresponds to this templates, right? So the actual HTML document with the rendered template. The controller is the center point here, which in Django, unfortunately, is called a view. which is just like this view over here. So that can be confusing. I apologize, but that's just how it is. So the controller in this general architecture, if you know how this diagram works, then that's fine. But the terminology can be confusing. Is there a question?
Can you use different frameworks for the front end instead of sending a template of HTML? Can you work with like React and send JSX templates instead?
Yes, you definitely can. And that's basically what we're going to end up doing by the end, is we're not going to use Django's templates, and the views will be slightly different. So we'll use something called the Django REST framework. So the models will be the same, and the views will be kind of modified. So you can kind of like, React will do all the templating, and the Django REST framework will handle the logic, a lot of the logic and a lot of the authentication stuff, and ultimately you'll spit out JSON. So you'll have the heavy lifting, the front end heavy lifting in your application, your React application, and then you'll use Django as just an API. A REST API, in fact. So it's the Django REST framework, and we can talk more about that later. But just so that's an overview of how Django works. So today we're going to go through all of this, and it's going to be probably very confusing. There's a lot of files, and you have to keep switching back between different stuff. And this is going to be a lot of copy pasting for this first exposure. So don't worry about getting every detail, but we'll go through this process over and over again. So okay, so if you want to start creating a Django app, we'll do it from scratch here. We'll first create a virtual environment. And we'll activate it. And we'll install Django. And you don't have to do this, but it says a little later on, it's kind of it's a convenience when we're looking at the shell. But I'm going to import, where was it? Django Extensions. This is not necessary, but okay. So now I have Django, but okay. So let's say that I have my application and I want to put this up. I want to put it up on my GitHub, and I want other people to use it. How is anyone else going to know? So maybe like I put it up there, and then 5 years later, someone wants to pull it down and start running Django. But Django was on version 8.5.20. So how can I make sure that?
A requirement text.
Okay, so how do I
freeze the requirements text?
Okay. So how do I do that?
Pip freeze. And then arrow, then requirements.txt.
Okay. So we can just look at pip freeze at first. So I'm in my virtual environment. So pip freeze will give me all of the stuff that's in my virtual environment. So I installed Django explicitly, and I installed Django extensions explicitly, but I get some other stuff as well. So it looks like these two modules that I installed also had their own dependencies that had to be installed as well. So what happens if I exit my virtual environment? and I run pip freeze again. So I have a different list of things. So this stuff is in my kind of global environment here.
Hey, Chad,
Yeah,
can you enlarge your text, please?
yes. Is one good or should I do two?
Bigger the better.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that there's gonna be a lot of moving around in files. We'll see if this works. Okay. So you can see that there's a different list. Like I don't have Django installed globally. And you might want to double check your systems. Go ahead and run pip freeze. And if you do have Django installed globally, you might want to delete it. Okay, so I'm gonna go back into my virtual environment. Okay, so I'm back in my virtual environment. I run pip freeze. So I'm back. I have my custom Django environment, and now, as Justin was saying, we can redirect the output. So here we're just printing a bunch of lines. We can redirect the output into a file, and that's standardly called requirements.txt. We could call it whatever we want, but that's how it's done. So here we're going to use the redirect, so we're redirecting from the output, standard output, to a file. And here is the list of with the specific versions that I am using in this project. So anyone else should be able to download these specific versions and their application should work. So you don't
do
need
that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Can you do that from anywhere in your project, or does it have to be like the requirement.txt will be created wherever path you're in a terminal?
Yeah, so it'll be created. So here I'm just running it. So it's assuming that it's going to put it in the same directory. I could tell it specifically where to put it. If I were, 5 levels into the project and I wanted to put it in the root, I could do that. But so you don't need to, you don't really need to do this for the stuff we do, but maybe for your projects, when you get to the projects, it's a good idea to create a requirements.txt file. All right, I'm going to delete this. Okay, so we have our virtual environment set up and we have Django installed. So let's create a project. Can we create a project or an app?
A project.
Project.
Yeah, we create a project. Here we go. We'll call it my site. Call this whatever we want. Okay, so now we have this thing, and again, you could use a dot at the end if you don't like having this particular kind of redundant file structure. So this is our project. So everything we need for our project is going to be in this folder right here. So you get a bunch of stuff by default. So you basically don't need to worry about that. The init.py also don't need to worry about this, and the WSGI as well. This is for server configuration. We will be changing these two things. Settings.py. This is your project level, top level settings, and the urls.py. And this is going to be right here. This is going to be the main kind of where you get directed. Okay. So if you look in the settings.py, we can just, there's a lot of stuff in here, so I wouldn't, I wouldn't get overwhelmed or anything. There's just a couple things that you're going to need to change typically. But there's a security key, which if I were using this, if I were intending to make a production app, this would need to be kept secret. There's debug true, which again, we get a little comment. So if this were production, we would need to change this, but we're just developing right now, so that's fine. Allowed hosts, also you don't need to worry about that, but you can, this is basically a security setting. And the installed apps. So again, when we just run the default, Django sets everything up for us, we get all of these things for free, which is why when we run migrate, Python manage.py migrate the first time, we get a whole bunch of databases set up. That's because Django has its own default apps that it uses. You can delete these if you want. You don't have to use them, but you should probably have a good reason for not doing that. And middleware. Middleware is just kind of, it's basically going to do stuff to the request object, which we'll take a look at soon. But there's all kinds of security and things like that. You can add additional middleware. You can write your own middleware. And then here are just some default settings. You don't need to worry about these. The database. So notice that the default database is going to use SQLite. So what we've been doing before for these challenges, we've been getting kind of a pre-built project and running it, and that's been changed to Postgres. So SQLite 3 is fine for development, and definitely has its use cases. But if you actually end up putting this on Heroku or something like that, you can't use SQLite 3, so you have to use Postgres. But for now, I'm just going to leave this. And then here's some built-in defaults for password validators. You can, if you have someone create a password, there's a bunch of default things that will be used to make sure that it's not, a common password and so on. You can add your own additional ones. You can remove these and so on. And then all kinds of other settings. This stuff basically has to do with if you want your site to render in multiple languages, things like that. And then here's the static. So we won't worry about that for right now. But all this stuff is customizable. You can add stuff to it. You can change what's already here. So that's the settings. And then the URLs here is just going to be, we'll look at this some more, but if someone goes, right now there's one default setting because Django has installed some apps already. So this is going to be default. There's an admin panel, which is very nice. So if we were to run this, which we'll do in a sec, we can go to the admin panel. All right. And then, so again, this is just for the project. When we create an app, there'll be another folder with slightly different contents. All right. So here's just a description of all of these default folders and files. So let's try running a server. So in addition, people like Django because it solves a lot of basic problems, right? There are only so many common patterns when you have a full stack web application, including development, right? So they have a local server that you can use for development, which is nice. So let's check that out. Need to be in the project. Okay, so we get some scary red text. We are going to ignore that for right now. it's saying we have a bunch of 18 unapplied migrations. Like, how could that be? We haven't made any models or anything like that. But again, because Django comes preloaded with a bunch of stuff, you do in fact have a bunch of unapplied migrations, but we'll take care of that in a sec. So for now, we're running the development server. We can go to localhost on port 8000. Let's check that out. And here we go. Here's the default. So this is the default kind of, it's working Django page. And again, we're getting some logging information about who's going where and so on. I can refresh that again. We have another request. Again, we can see we made a GET request to / whatever, and we got a 200 response. And this is probably the incoming port number. Okay. So now we have our local server up and running. So we're all ready to start developing now. Okay. But of course, we can't just have a bare project. Just doesn't make much sense. We need to create an app. So we can do that by instead of running Django admin when we start the project, this will be a manage.py thing. So I'm going to stop the server. In fact, I'm going to have 2 windows. And one of these is just going to be running the server so I can do stuff. So all right, so I'm running the server over here. I'm just going to push that off to the side. And then in here, I can create an app. So python.py start app, and we'll call it polls. Is there a question?
Yes, Chad, if we wanted to make a GitHub repository, what would we want to put in the gitignore file here?
Your virtual environment, any Pi cache stuff that may get generated. Depending, you might want to put, if you're using SQLite database, you may or may not, depending on your use case, you may or may not want to put your database there. Definitely don't want to put things like your secret key. Don't want to be putting that up on GitHub. So you'd want to handle this a different way, but I'd say for like a starter gitignore, I would do, so one reason to always call your virtual environment the same thing is that it's just easier to handle gitignores. You don't have to come in here and think of whatever cool name you just came up with for your virtual environment. So virtual environment, Pi, cache, and then maybe if you had like a file for your environment variables or something like that, you could put that in there.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we have this other folder we created with start app. We called it polls.
Sorry, Chad.
Yeah.
This is a different method of creating an app here, or starting an app? No?
How do you mean a different method?
So I thought you mentioned instead of doing a Django admin start, or no, sorry. Oh, so the manage.py is the only way we start apps?
Apps, yeah, so there's a difference. So when you start your project, you don't have a manage.py yet. So starting a
Okay.
project, one of the things that happens is that it generates the manage.py file.
Gotcha. And then it's what we use to start apps.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
I was just pointing
I-
out that it's a different, a different command to start the project versus starting an app.
But we can't start an app by saying Django admin start app polls. That'll do the same thing than what you just did.
Can you? I don't think that you can. Are you? Oh,
Somebody mentioned it before at some point that that's a way to start an app. Django admin start app.
it could be. I don't. If it
Okay.
works, then that's fine. I don't. I'm not sure about that, but I can. I guess I could just try it right now. So, let's see. So. Oh, let me try. Okay, yeah, I guess that does work. Cool. Yeah, so dealer's choice, I guess. You can do that too. All right, so we've got our polls app. So let's just take a look at what we get in here. So notice we have a migrations folder, and we haven't run any migrations, but we get a migrations folder. Again, we have the same init init.py. This is just to make this a module, just for importing, basically. And so you don't want to change that unless you have a very good specific reason. And we get some different stuff here. So we have admin, which we're not going to really worry about today, but this allows you to interact with the admin console. Apps.py, again, you shouldn't need to change this specifically. This is automatically generated. And then models, which we are familiar with. So we've been just doing models. And then tests we're also familiar with. And views, which should be new. So again, views is kind of like the central node where all of the important decision making happens in your app. Okay, so we're gonna copy and paste this, and we're gonna be doing a lot of copy pasting, so I apologize, but there's a lot of stuff to get through. So we're going to go into our app. Again, our app, not our project, but our app. Question?
In the sense of, when we say app, in the sense of, is that also kind of like, that's a Django thing?
Yes.
I imagine, right?
Yes, this is Django terminology.
Okay, so app, so like if we had we're making a website cafe, the whole website would be just the app.
Yeah, so you could refer to that as an app, but yeah, again, it's confusing. But when we talk about an app in the context of Django, we're talking about this specific modular piece of a project.
Okay, and then I believe somebody mentioned that pretty much for us here at Platoon, we're only going to have one app in our projects, right?
Yeah, so I mean, well, in fact, you have a whole bunch of apps in your project because Django creates a whole bunch of apps in your project by default. And yeah, so it's up to you, but you certainly can get away with just having one app per project. When we get into, if you want to use authentication, start getting into authentication and other things like JSON web tokens, you're going to have to do a little bit more work there, but so it's up to you. It's a design decision. So if I want to do something, do I need one class or two classes or three classes or one function or two functions or three functions? It's just kind of up to you how you want to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so here we've just added something to our views. So now, so a view, there are class-based views. We don't want to go into this now, but class-based views and function-based views. So we're going to start by just using function-based views. And this, so we're not really doing much intense logic here, but we are taking in a request object. So the client, when the client hits the endpoint, Django, along with all of its middleware and everything else, is going to create this request object. And we can do things with it, but for right now, we're not. And we have this HTTP response, which is a very kind of basic thing, and we're not going to be using that. We're going to be using higher level things. But for now, this is like, the hello world of Django. You just have a basic HTTP response, and we're returning some text. So how does this work? So in order to actually call this function, which returns an HTTP response, we're going to need to add something to our URLs file. So we'll go to, first off, so there are two levels of the URLs. This, again, I think can be a source of confusion. So there's a URLs file at our project level. Again, the very top level, there's a URLs file right here. And we'll also have a URLs file for our app. So it's kind of like you can get redirected twice, basically. So if I walk into a building and I have no idea where anything is, I say, I want to, whatever. I go to a government building and say, I want to get a marriage certificate. So they say, oh, that's on the 5th floor, right? So I go to the front desk and I first get redirected to the 5th floor. Then I go up to the 5th floor and then there's another desk and I say, hey, I want to get a marriage certificate. They say, okay, that's in room 34. So I get further redirected to that specific place that I want to go to. So the URLs kind of works the same way. So this is just the most basic redirection right here. And from here, this will redirect you to another URLs file, which for whatever reason doesn't get created automatically when you create an app in Django. So we'll have to create this ourselves. So we're going to create another URLs file in polls. So urls.py. So now we have two URLs files. One of them is on the project level, which we'll revisit in a sec. And the other that we've just created is in our app. We can paste this in. So this will not make sense to you right now, and that's fine. So we're going to do one other step, and then we'll talk about how this is working. So we're also going to modify our project level URLs. Did I copy that? We'll just override that for now. Okay, so what we've done here is in our project level URLs, we say, if anyone goes to / whatever our base URL is / polls, then redirect them to our URLs file in polls, right? So you have our polls. This is just like an import, right? Polls.urls means the polls folder and the URLs file. So if anyone goes to /polls, our first, our initial URLs handler is going to say, oh, you must want to go to the polls URLs. So they're going to get referred here, the polls.urls, and once they're here, any additional, we can further specify the path. So here, since this is a blank string, it just basically means just polls, not polls/1 or polls/users or whatever. And here, so this path takes an actual URL or a URI path, and it's telling us if someone hits this path, call this function. And this function comes from views, which we're importing. So this is our views folder. So our views folder, which we're importing from the same directory, dot index. So the index function in our views folder. So views.index, the views file dot the index function. So if anyone goes to /polls/nothing, then call the views.index function, which is right here, and this function will return an HTTP response. So we can check and see if this works. Let's see. So our database should be running right now. So let's just see. It's one of the nice things about this development database is that it will do a hot reload, so you don't have to quit the server. So why did this happen? It was working before, and now it's not working.
There's no URLs that match that path.
Exactly. So if we look, so we get a little hint here, but if we look at our code, we can see, again, this is our first line of defense or whatever. So it's going to go to /polls. Notice we don't have a, an empty string or slash, just a plain slash. So as we currently have this built out, there's only one endpoint that we can go to, which is /polls. Anything else is just going to be a 404. Okay, so we're going to, so that means we're going to have to go to /polls. And when we go to /polls, we get this hello world.
Question,
There.
Chad.
Yep.
Does that slash at the end, does it matter if you include it or not in the when you created it in the URLs file?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a Django gotcha. So we can try not including this and see what happens. Says page not found, and this error is not the most helpful, but it's just something to watch out for. You'll almost certainly encounter this error and you'll be baffled and you'll spend 2 hours looking around and then you'll realize, oh, I just need a slash. I guarantee you that's going to happen to like at least half of you, and that's fine. So you need the trailing slash here.
And
yeah,
even though you said the template in Django is the what has our HTML, right now we're just returning hello world in views for like instructional purposes.
Yeah, it's just the first step because we don't have a template yet. We'll get to that in a sec, but this is
okay.
So we can inspect this. I'm not even sure that it's actually, yeah. So it's it's pretty sparse HTML, just a body, but it is proper HTML. So apparently, I'm not sure if you ran it with curl, it would be different, but whatever. Okay, so we have this HTTP response, and so again, views typically is going to handle all of the logic. We're not really doing any logic here. We're just saying if you go here, but you might want to do. Well, let's check out the contents of the request. So print dot. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can look at on the request object. Yeah, sorry, I have to keep switching. So I'm gonna make a request here. And so here, so one of the many things on this request object is gonna have something called headers, and you can see all of the headers. So I made a request from my Chrome browser, and you can see that, it's Chrome, Google Chrome, blah, blah, blah. Upgrade insecure requests, user agent. Again, this is my machine cookie. So I get a Csrf token. So so you can do different things. So if I want to do some authentication, I could check if a user is logged in. I can check if this is a GET request or a POST request. I can get all the query parameters or the body of a POST request. I can take that information and make a request to the database here. And then once I get all the information that I need, I package it up and send it off to the template, which we're not really doing right here. But that's what you would do. And we'll see more of that in a second. All right, let's keep chugging along. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna now do the database stuff. So we already kind of looked at this initially. We can take a look again. So the MVC Framework Model View Controller. This is a standard architecture for web applications, full stack web applications. We have the model, which is going to handle database interactions. We have the views, which is kind of the central controller, like the real logic of your application is going to be here. We have the template, which is what's going to end up getting served to the client in the end. It's URLs. I guess you could include it in views, maybe something like that. Kind of just the router. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and do some more copy pasting. We'll create a models now. So we've got a view, we've got our URLs, and we got a view. So now we'll do our model. And as you're developing, you can do this really in any order you feel like. If you want to start with the models, and then there's a few things that need to happen, and you can kind of do them in whatever order works best for you. Okay, so here we have a question and a choice. So what's the relationship? Just looking at these models, what's the relationship between question and choice?
A question can have many choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a one-to-many. So a choice belongs to one. We could design this differently. Again, we could set this up to where a choice could be reused for lots of different questions, but that's kind of a design decision or use case. That doesn't really matter, but I just want to point that out. You can tell that it's a one-to-many because this has a foreign key and this does not. So if this were many-to-many, we could easily change that in our code and just make this many-to-many. We really wouldn't have to change anything else. Just make this many-to-many. Our underlying database structure would change significantly, but our code here wouldn't change very much. All right, so now we have a database. So let's make sure, let's see. So let's double check our settings, our projects settings file. So settings, so notice we have our app, our polls app, but it is not a part. So our project doesn't know about our app yet because we have to include it here. How you do this is different. You could include it at the top or at the bottom or whatever. Some people like to keep them separate. So you can do something like something like that. If you want to separate things, you could also have another one for, so there's like standard Django apps. There's also third-party apps, which you will probably end up using at some point. And there's also, you know, your own apps that you're making. So some people like to separate those out just to, you know, as an organizational thing. But that's totally up to you. Okay, so now our project knows about our app. So we've changed our models. We've in fact created models, so change them. So let's run make migrations. Okay, and then we'll migrate. And all of the default, because this is the first time we run it, all of the default Django stuff is going to get built along with our humble polls app. Okay, so we installed this at the beginning, which is a totally optional extension. It's convenience, because when you go into the shell, if you want to do stuff with the models, you have to import the models. So if you use this, then it'll basically by default import everything in your application. So it just saves you some typing, which is nice. So let's go ahead and Django extensions. So again, I could just add this here, or I could add it here, but I'll keep it separate. This will be like the third party. Oops. So I can make a note here, maybe something like,
You need a plus equals on that.
thank you. Thank you. So that's totally up to you again. All right. So we can run, since we've installed this special extension, we can change this. So the normal, to get the shell up and running, it's python manage.py shell. So let's just try that first. Okay, so we have the interactive console. We'll get a super fancy one. So I think when I record I just get these weird, okay, manage.py and then shell plus. So you can see that it just automatically basically imports everything, which is nice. So now if we wanted to, since we have our database, let's say what's in our database, we have questions and choices. So let's do and test it out. So we don't have anything actually loaded, but this is a thing. So our database actually exists. So that's nice. So we can kind of copy and paste this. So I'll say, just as a slight tangent. So last night, as I was going through this, I decided I didn't want to, type all of this stuff line by line. It was too tedious. Copy and paste line by line. So I thought I would save myself some time by writing a quick script, which ended up taking me like an hour or more to do. So I wanted to share, this is a common experience that I have, and give you too. This is a XKCD comic, if you're not familiar. So I spent a lot of time on this task. I should write a program automating it. I'll let you take that in for a second. So that definitely is a thing. So I'll show you what I came up with, just for fun. This is kind of stupid actually, but since I wasted so much time on it, I might as well share it with you. So if you're in here, so let's say we have all this stuff, and we want to insert this into the shell. We have, I mean, there's more than one way to do this, but the kind of not great way that I came up with. So if we go out here, we'll just create we'll just paste that in. And then, so we're in the shell, so we can't really, it's kind of tricky because we can only really input one line at a time. I mean, there are other ways to get around it, but so you want to be able to run all of this stuff one line at a time, but you can't really input it one line at a time. It's kind of a weird situation. So you need to somehow run a one-liner that will run all of this other code at the same time. I'm not sure if this will work because I tested it on something else, but let's see if it works. It does not work. Let's see. I wonder if this is actually reading the file. Anyway, so I'll just describe it rather than waste much time. But so this is a one-liner. So so I have to import two things. So you can import things. Typically, you import them on one line and then use them on another line. But you can use this dunder, dunder property. So you import OS and then basically find the file path, and then read those lines, and then execute every line in the lines. I'll see if I can play around with it later and get it to work in this particular setting. But so that's pointless, but just thought I'd share. So let's actually, I'm gonna have to actually do this now. So question.objects.all. Sorry for all the screen shifting. If you have seizures, feel free to look away for the next few seconds.
You can copy and paste from your document above the terminal.
Oh, thank you very much. And then so we can again, we're just saving something and then we're examining it. Okay. And if we look at our models, you can see that we have a specific question. So question dot choices, because we've given it a related name, we can just access it like that. So and I don't think we have any choices yet. But if we did, then we would see all of them. So that's why it's a good idea to use a related name. This makes things a little easier. Okay. So we can fix this issue where we're getting displayed something that's not terribly helpful. We go into our models. Again, we're just going to add, I'm just going to copy paste the whole thing, but we're just adding this. We're going to override the string method. So we're just overriding the string method. And because hopefully we haven't changed our model at all, our actual model in the database, we don't have to migrate again. We'll do.
Did you just leave the shell and come back in?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I had to, but I just for the sake of thoroughness, in case I'm not sure if that stuff was cached or if it would be updated automatically. But now we can see we have a different output instead of just object one whatever. This is the string representation that we customized. So that's also a good thing to do. It's basically you should do it for all of your models. Well, we're not going to look at the admin panel, but it's also nice when you do stuff on the admin panel because you can actually see what you're working with. Okay, so we did that. So here we're okay. So let's add a couple. Add some choices. Okay. Again, sorry for the switching. All right, so now we've added two choices. So if we run quest, we get two choices. All right. Okay, so now we're going to add some more. We'll talk more about REST, and there's kind of standard ways of doing all this stuff. But for now we're not going to talk in detail about that. But we're going to add 3 routes, so you can get a specific poll, or the results of a specific poll, or you can vote on a specific poll. So we'll modify our URLs in our app. So polls.urls. And here what we're doing, we're just adding some additional routes. And so this probably looks weird, but we're basically, because we don't know, we can't hard code a specific number. So if someone goes to polls/50, we don't want to have to hard code every single route from every single poll we could possibly have. So we need to make this dynamic. So this is just a way of saying, telling Python that this is going to be, telling Django that this is going to be an integer, and that we can refer to it by question ID. So when it passes it along, we're going to have access to this value. So if I go to, whatever polls/5, then I'm going to end up getting sent to views.detail. We don't have a views.detail yet, but we'll make it. So we're going to change our views. We're going to add kind of stub functions here for now. We go into our views. So we added routes. We added some routes in our app. So again, this is all falling under this polls. So this is all, localhost, whatever, /polls. And then if it's polls slash anything else, it's gonna, including nothing, it's going to get routed over here. And then we're gonna handle like with finer grain detail, all so slash polls slash nothing. We'll go to index slash polls slash 5. We'll go to we'll call the detail slash polls slash 5 slash results. We'll call the results function and so on. Okay. So we only have one question right now, but let's see if this works. Slash polls, we can make sure if this still works. Yep, slash polls slash 1. So that works. What if we try so we're voting on question 1 now. What if we try to go to, well, for now that will work, even though we don't have an actual, because we just have dummy stuff. Okay. All right, so we've handled, so far we've looked at the models. We have models, right? We have our URLs, which is gonna be the initial entry point for everything. It's gonna get passed off to a view, depending on the URL. And the view will, probably make a query, they'll talk to the models. And then ultimately what we want the view to do is to, handle creating a template or pass it off to a template creator and then return the results of that. So we need to look at the templates. So if you did the Jinja 2 stuff, this should look familiar. Again, so the specific naming conventions for this might seem a little bizarre, but just something to look out for. So we're gonna have to do some kind of what seems like redundant naming. So in the polls directory, so in our app, create a templates folder, and then in that, we'll create another one called polls. So we'll do that now. That seems strange. And then in templates, we're going to create, it's going to have the same name as the app. And then in here, I'm going to create an index.html, and we'll paste this in. So is everyone more or less familiar with Django or Jinja 2?
Not really.
Okay. So what's happening is that all this stuff is ultimately, so let's go ahead and make a request, and let me just go here. So let me just complete this last step and then we'll take a look at it. So we're going to change the index, but I'm copying the whole thing. Views. Okay, so we're changing our index. So now this is behaving more like a typical view function. So we're going to make a call to the database. In this case, we're going to get all of our questions ordered by descending publish date. And then we're creating this data. So based on the results we get from our database, we're creating this data object. And then we're going to render. So this is basically sending this to filling out the Jinja 2 template. So it's going to look for this particular HTML file. And this is going to be our context, or the data that we're sending in. And then it's going to return it's going to create a response that's basically generated HTML. So let's look at that real quick. We'll go to the index. So not very exciting, but as you can see, if you look at the elements, this is just regular HTML. So you have a body, you have this list item, and we have an A tag. And if we look at our corresponding, so this, you know, you get just an actual HTML file when you actually, so this will all get processed. So we're going to check if latest question list. So if we look in our view again, latest question list, we're passing that in as data.
Question, Chad, why did you have to make that into a dictionary?
That's just what the template expects. I don't think you necessarily have to, but I think it definitely expects a dictionary.
And what expects a dictionary?
The template. If anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's possible to send something other than a dictionary.
And when you say template, what do you mean exactly?
I mean this is a template. So it's not filled in yet, right? It's like a form. It's like you can think of it as like a class, right? So this is a class, and here are all the instance variables. And we're gonna, based on this particular request, where is that? Based on a particular request at a particular time and a particular state of our database, we're gonna fill out the form a little bit differently, potentially.
You don't have to pass in a dictionary. It can be just a single value, but it's kind of seems like it's convention from some other tutorials that I've seen.
Okay.
So is that because the render has to take in a dictionary? Or how did that work?
To be honest, I haven't really played around with all of the ways you could break this yet, but yeah, I would pass it a dictionary. You can also pass it an empty dictionary. That's also fine. If, for example, you don't have any items, you just want to pass it a blank dictionary, you can do that as well. But yeah, I would create a dictionary with your data and then pass in a dictionary to the template.
If you
So
give it
can
a
you just
dictionary, then you can iterate over it versus a single piece of data.
Yeah, the render method takes in multiple arguments, and where Chad is passing in data is generally a dictionary, or it should be a dictionary.
And then, so we have a dictionary, which could have, this could be a huge dictionary or just one item like we have there. And then what we're doing is now our template knows about this value because we're passing it in. So if we did something like, I don't know. Well, let's just misspell this so it doesn't know about it. And we'll try hitting this endpoint again. So what we've done is change. So there's this latest question list, which doesn't exist. So that's going to be none. So this will evaluate to false. And then what happens if this is false? We just get this no polls are available tag.
And Jinja just came pre-installed with Django? Is that why we're able to use it?
Yeah, this is all part of Django. I didn't install this. So Django uses a whole bunch of stuff. As we saw, Psycop G2 and Jinja 2 and a whole bunch of other things. So you don't have to explicitly install it. Django will take care of that for you. It's just built in. So here, so for example, if we have 100 polls, now we just have to write these, this couple lines of code, and we can dynamically generate as much HTML as our data requires. We don't have to hard code anything.
And where does Jinja fall into this? What is it doing? Is it converting this HTML to something, or?
Yeah, it's filling in the form.
Okay.
So it's going to take a look at all this stuff, and just like we saw, if this evaluates to false, we get HTML that's just a paragraph tag. If this evaluates to true, then we get a bunch of UL elements, or and a bunch of LI elements.
Yeah, think of Jinja 2 as allows you the ability to put Python variables within HTML.
Yeah, and there's other stuff you can do. You can add, I don't know, off the top of my head. There's a whole bunch of, well, we can maybe look at them. So Django.
Are you able to embed templates within each other, like add a header and a footer and like a nav bar?
Yep. We're not gonna talk about that today, but yes, you can do that. So here is the Django documentation, so built-in templates. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can look through this. There's just, you know, you can create comments, you can create blocks. There's for, let's take a look at the for loop. Extends. So extends is something that you would use if you're creating additional templates. Filter. For, so you can use a for loop here as we're doing in our template. So we're getting an array of items, or a query set, basically an array when we hit our database. So for every question in our result set, we're going to create a new one of these. And there's some other things you can take a look at. There's some other extra fun variables. For empty, so this is just a convenience, kind of a convenience function. So sometimes you want to do this as we have, if it's, you know, you can have a for loop and then if else statements, or you can simplify a little bit with for empty. And there's also, in addition to that, let's see, sorry. You can generate fake text. That's kind of cool. And one sec, a lot of stuff going on here. URL will also use this. This is a function that can basically dynamically generate a link instead of hard coding or like a URL. So we're going to polls/1 or whatever. So here we're hard coding this, the href /polls/whatever. But we can make this dynamic using the URL function.
And is this
okay, so here's what I was looking for. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask for now, is this bad practice to have that kind of Python logic in the same file as an index HTML file? Does that have to do with like the separation of like controller has the business logic or whatever logic, and then templates has just HTML? Is that not what it means by like separating, or no?
Yeah, I mean, you could think of it that way for sure. But
this is normal practice.
Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to Django full stack applications.
We're going to be building on this. So, but it's using Django as a full stack application. You will be having Python logic within your templates in some capacity.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to try to, I know it's been a while, approaching lunchtime, so I'm going to cut off the questions temporarily unless someone has a very specific one, and I'm going to try to run through the rest of this. Okay, so we have our template, so now we can actually visit the template. So we're going to do the same thing. It's basically, we're going to fill out this detail, which is essentially the same thing. We're just going to get one question instead of all the questions. So I go to views. So index will get all of the objects. This will get the specific, again, question ID. So if we look, where are we getting question ID from? We're getting it from question ID right there. So we're grabbing it, it's going to get passed into the function, and then we can use that. So we're going to use that to make a query to fetch the specific ID that the person is looking for. Again, polls templates polls. You can go ahead and paste this in. Detail.html. So same deal, right? We're passing in this question object so we can access elements that like the ID, the question text, and then the question is going to have a bunch of choices associated with it. So you can loop over that. So you have this for loop. So notice the double brackets for things like individual items, properties, and the single bracket with the parentheses for like functions. So if we have a for loop or an if statement or whatever, then we'll have the brackets with the percent, sorry. And if it's just a value, then we'll use the double brackets. Again, you don't need to memorize all the syntax right now. You can look this stuff up pretty easily. So helper methods. So again, this is just referencing the fact that we're hard coding this a tag here. So we're going to add one other thing. This is it's not, especially when you only have one app per project, this is not an issue, but probably best practice. We can specify, basically give a namespace to our application when we use these names. So if we want to dynamically generate URL links like a tags, this is something we should do. And again, you don't need to understand all of this right now. This is just an initial run through. So we'll go to, this is URLs, polls URLs. So this is the same thing essentially, except we're adding, so this is a set Django thing. So Django knows about app_name, and it will basically create a namespace called polls. So anytime you use index or detail or whatever, you can refer to it as polls.index. So we can change this tag here in the polls templates object index. So again, instead of hard coding this /polls/ whatever, we have this nice, this is all dynamic now. So this is, again, the brackets with %, so that means Django's doing like a function or some logic. Then we have the URL, so this is actually a function, and it's being passed these parameters. So the URL function is being passed polls. So again, this polls comes from the fact that we added this in our app name here. So polls detail, and then question.id. So this is just a dynamic way of doing this. So we don't have to go, if we change anything, we don't have to go in, digging around, changing things in 5 different places. All right. So this is a form. Again, this is more complicated stuff, but we'll just go over this quickly, just as an exposure. You don't need to memorize all this now. So detail.html. So we're adding a form here. Just a couple quick things to note. So here's an error message. We're adding another thing. So if there's an error message or not, don't worry about that right now. We have a form. Notice this Csrf token. So this is mandatory. This is something that comes with, you can disable it, but by default, it comes with Django. And anytime you make a post request, you have to include a Csrf token. It's for security reasons to mitigate cross-site scripting stuff. So that's basically like a unique identifier that will show that a particular piece of information was made with a particular request. Okay, and if we go to details /polls /details, we get this new, our form, and then we can vote on it, which again, doesn't really do anything right now, but that's fine. So you can look at this, the for loop counter. So if you look in the reference documentation, you'll see a lot of this stuff. Again, this is just about exposing you to it. You don't have to memorize everything. There's a lot happening, especially with this very rapid copy pasting, which I apologize for. So here we're just adding something else. So vote. So now we're doing something. We haven't really done anything with the request object yet, but here we're doing something with the request object. So if I want to vote on a particular question, I'm gonna make a call to the database. This call to the database has been put into a separate function. And then I'm going to try. So the request has a whole bunch of stuff on it. One of the things it has on it is going to be post if it's a post request. And I can see, just because of the way we've created the form, it'll have this choice key. And then whatever the choice is, that will be it. Otherwise, it'll throw an error, and then I can handle the error here. And then I can increase the votes and then save it. And then ultimately, after that, I redirect. So this is not strictly necessary, but it's basically always going to happen. So you want to redirect after you make a post request. So again, you don't need to worry about all these details, but we just want to see the whole picture just once. Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll add this to, we'll change the results. Okay, so now if I want to see the results for a particular question, I make a call to the database. I get that particular question, and then I can pass that in. So I go to the URLs / template does not exist. I'm gonna have to make that. One step ahead of me, read me. Results.txt. HTML. Let's try that again. So I don't have any votes. I can try voting. This should actually work now. So I can see I can increase. Now I get another vote. So this is all working. I'm doing everything now. This is a complete application. So I can make posts and get requests. I'm adding things to the database. I'm fetching things from the database. And that's being expressed in the HTML. So that's basically it. So it's 12:05. Are there any questions? I know I went over the last part very quickly, but you don't need to memorize, how to use a form or anything like that right now. But does everyone understand the big picture of how Django works, even if you don't understand the details? You start with URLs are the entry point. You get redirected to starting from your project's URLs to your app's URLs. You can, depending on what someone passes in, you refer them to a particular function in the views, and that function will do whatever logic it does, including often talking to the database. Based on that, it will get whatever information it needs and then create a template that's going to call a templater, which Django uses Jinja 2. So it calls that templater, which generates an actual HTML document, and then the view will send that HTML document as a response to the client. Okay.
You're going to be going through that entire process over and over again.
Yeah.
So create URL, create a view, and then create a template.